Go.
Welcome everyone to Ballots and Brews, a virtual happy hour hosted by the Colorado Sun. I'm John Frank, a political reporter here at the Sun, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jesse Paul. We both want to start by first saying thanks for joining us, and we want to offer a special welcome to our unaffiliated members. Jesse and I write the unaffiliated political newsletter twice a week, and it goes behind the scenes in Colorado politics to help explain what's happening and why. So if you like politics, this is a must-read, a newsletter unlike any out there in Colorado. And now on to tonight. This is our first Ballots and Brews, but hopefully not our last. Now, this is something that I typically do every election year with friends and coworkers who often text or ask me great questions about the ballot. So we have them come over, we have a beer in the backyard, and we talk politics. That's not possible this year, obviously. My backyard is far too small for the huge turnout we have here tonight on Zoom and Facebook Live. So once again, thanks for joining us. But I hope we can keep this casual, just like a backyard conversation, and open to all questions. No questions too silly. And of course, we hope you're relaxing with a good Colorado beer. I write about beer for the Sun and wrote the book Beer Lovers Colorado. A cheap plug there. And as I tell people all the time, beer helps politics go down, and these days more than ever. Before we dive into politics, I want to talk about what we're drinking. Jesse and I both have a beer from Hazy Brewing here in Denver called Bota. Cheers, Jesse. I got Jesse a real craft beer, so he'll turn to the Coors Banquet after this, I'm sure. But this is a beer made in collaboration with the Denver Clerk's Office that encourages everyone, regardless of their party stripes, to vote. And it's the Racine's is one of a dozen or so Latino breweries in Colorado, so definitely check them out. The other beer I have tonight has the exact same message. Vote. This is a Hazy Ipa from Cerebral Brewing. Hazy is a pretty good description of this political season. So this will be the one I'm really looking forward to tonight. It's got a touch of coconut, candied orange, and a little pine hoppiness on the back end. So I bought these beers today, and you can find them at the brewery still. So we hope you check them out, and we hope you vote. So let's get started here by clicking open a beer and telling you a little bit about the program tonight. Jesse and I are going to do our best to run down the statewide ballot in 15 minutes or less. And we'll hopefully hit the highlights on the top races, ballot measures, judges, and hopefully stir plenty of questions for you to ask. And we'll get to those at the end. Drop them in the chat if you have a question. And Eric, our Chief Technology Officer and author of The Sunriser, will help us get to those once we're done with a quick presentation. And also feel free to drop in the chat what you're drinking tonight from your local brewery, distillery, or kombucha maker for that matter. I know Eric's drinking local coffee tonight because he never sleeps. And you'll probably see some guest appearances. There she is, from Bonnie, the Colorado Sun mascot. Jesse, you want to introduce Bonnie?
Sure, this is Bonnie, a 6-month-old golden retriever puppy who's has a lot of energy right now, so I might have to step off screen every couple minutes to take her.
No problem. Okay, well, we're going to start here with the top races. Jesse's going to tell you about the U.S. Senate contest between John Hickenlooper and Cory Gardner. I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock and make him stick to it here, though. Jesse, I'm not going to mute your mic if you go over, so I'll give you 10 extra seconds.
It won't be like the presidential debate. All right, well,
go for it.
Yeah, the Senate race here in Colorado is considered probably the marquee race, probably the most important race here, the most competitive one. It's between former Governor John Hickenlooper and our incumbent U.S. Senator Cory Gardner, who is finishing up his first term. This race is really important because it could decide the future of the United States Senate. Democrats really need the seat if they want to take back control of the Senate from Republicans. So we've seen tons of money pouring into Colorado from outside groups and people outside the state for the candidates. And I'm sure if you're watching TV these days, you're seeing a lot of those back and forth ads, the two candidates attacking each other. So kind of the state of the race is pretty interesting. Hickenlooper has consistently led Cory Gardner in polls for about a year. And he most recently is actually leading by about 10 percentage points. His lead appears to be pretty consistent heading into the final weeks here. Cory Gardner had a tough re-election bid kind of from the start here in Colorado because of the state's electorate, which is shifting left. And on top of that, the fact that, President Donald Trump is pretty unpopular here, especially among unaffiliated voters who are the largest voting bloc here in Colorado. So the campaign's played out in a really interesting way, kind of maybe as you'd expect. Hickenlooper is really tying Gardner to Trump at every single juncture that he can, using that as basically the tip of his spear. Lately, we've seen a little bit more of attacks over the U.S. Supreme Court seat and Cory Gardner's apparently contradictory comments from 2016 to this year regarding filling a seat in election year. And Cory Gardner has basically just hammered Hickenlooper the entire campaign over his ethics violations, which came out a few months ago, right? John, you covered that over the summer, right before the primary race in June. So you've seen a ton of ads from Gardner attacking Hickenlooper on that front. And there's an interesting new message that Gardner's been using in the past few weeks, calling Hickenlooper selfish and trying to paint him as, not being one who's going to be able to help out Colorado. I think my time is running out, so I'm going I yield my time.
Wonderful. Now I have to figure out how to turn this off. This is a very low-rent sports center show or something going on here. Okay, I'm going to hit the timer, but I won't take 2 minutes to talk about the presidential race because there's not much to talk about. It's not much of a contest here in Colorado. President Trump came back in February, right? Jesse, you covered that rally down in Colorado Springs?
Yes, February 20th.
Yeah, right before the coronavirus hit, at least Colorado for that matter. And, his one visit's a pretty stark contrast from 2016. When I was covering him making near weekly stops here in Colorado, a handful of visits in the final month, they really thought they could close the gap here. Of course, you'll remember that he lost to Hillary Clinton by 4.9 percentage points in 2016 here in Colorado. Now, this year's Democratic candidate, Joe Biden, has not held a public campaign event in Colorado. He held only a private fundraiser here in Denver. And if this continues, which it sure looks like it will, he'll be the first presidential candidate in more than 2 decades not to hold a public campaign event in Colorado. We've been a swing state for about 2 decades, so this year, not so much. Why so little attention? Well, the poll shows it's not a close race. The Sun's poll tracker shows Biden with an average lead of 12 percentage points since September. Now, Trump's team has spent months knocking on doors, trying to turn out voters, but much of that was actually for U.S. Senator Cory Gardner. They dovetailed their efforts this year, and Gardner's team is really driving a lot of the canvassing. Biden's camp even pulled their TV ads. That's how not close they consider this race. Now, where these candidates stand on Colorado issues is something that we still looked into. We put together a voter's guide that you can find at coloradosun.com. Click the voter's guide link at the top of the page, and you'll scroll down the presidential race. You'll find it there. We asked them about all sorts of local issues and made them answer on Colorado topics. So Eric can drop that link into the chat. Be sure to check that out if you are one of the 5% that's still undecided. Amazing, 2 minutes, perfect. Okay, we're now going to go into, I still know how to work an iPhone. We're now going to go into the ballot measures. There are 11 statewide ballot measures. And Jesse and I split them up, and we're going to cover each in 1 minute. You hear that, Jesse? This is quicker. I'm going to start. Let's see if this is even possible. Okay, we're going to start with Amendment B. So this is the repeal of the Gallagher Amendment. And let me just say, it's impossible to describe how this works in 1 minute. But let me cut to the chase. Right now, this constitutional provision sets property tax rates in our state, the ratio, that 55% for commercial and 45% for residential. And this keeps residential rates artificially low. Colorado has some of the lowest property tax rates in the country. And this sounds great, right? Well, it means businesses pay a larger share of the property tax, and the calculation often will squeeze local governments, school districts, and particularly special districts that cover fire departments and so forth throughout the state. So it also creates geographical inequities because, of course, property tax rates here in Colorado are very different than the ones out in Fort Morgan. So it's created a lot of inequities in our system. Let's dive into it more in the questions. We're happy to talk about it. We've done plenty of good stories about it. But there, my time's run out. Okay. On to the next one. I don't know hotness levels. Amendment C, I'll keep this short. I'll do this in 20 seconds. This expands the ability of nonprofits to conduct bingo and raffles as fundraisers. It eases the current rules we have, the restrictions on how long you have to be around before you can get a license to do a bingo raffle. Critics worry this represents a professionalization and expansion of charitable gaming, but for nonprofits, they do use this as a main fundraising tool. Why this isn't our Constitution is probably an entire another happy hour, so we'll just move on from that. Okay, Jesse, on to you. Amendment 76.
Okay, Amendment 76 was put on the ballot by conservative groups, and what it would do is basically clarify in state law that you have to be 18 and a U.S. citizen in order to vote in Colorado elections. Now, you might say that's already the law in Colorado. Well, kind of. The idea is to shut down access to, or allowing municipalities to allow people who are living in the U.S. illegally to vote in local elections. Home rule cities might be able to do that now. Some other places across the country have done that. Yeah, this is hard to do in a minute, John. And, you know, one of the things...
20 seconds.
Okay, so opponents of this say there's a few reasons why they don't like it. One is because it could disenfranchise voters and confuse people that they're not actually allowed to vote. And the other thing that's interesting about it is because of that 18-year-old threshold, 17-year-olds in Colorado are actually allowed to vote currently if they turn in a primary election if they turn 18 by the general election. So we've done a lot of reporting on this. It's a pretty interesting issue. And there's actually questions about whether or not the main intention of the bill, the idea that it would bar people or home rule cities from allowing people in the country illegally to vote would actually go through. There's kind of a differing opinions on that. So it'll be interesting to see how voters cast their ballots on this, because it's would appear to codify state law, but it really doesn't.
Perfect. Okay, Amendment 77. Now, this would allow gambling towns to increase or remove their bet limits on casino games. Right now, the bulk of state taxes on gambling go to community colleges and the local towns and counties near the gambling operations. Now, it kind of breaks down to how you think about gambling and whether you support this up in the mountains. The opposition is mostly around whether we should expand gambling and bringing higher stakes games and bets potentially down the line like you see in Vegas. But for the supporters, they say local control should rule here. We should let the local residents decide what their town should look like and what kind of gambling they should be able to offer. Also, how much revenue they'll be able to get from it. Jesse, Proposition EE, starting the clock now.
All right, this is one that I've done a lot of reporting on. So Proposition EE was put on the ballot by state lawmakers in the final days of the 2020 legislative session. What it would do is raise taxes on tobacco and cigarettes, and for the first time tax nicotine products in Colorado. So like vaping products right now aren't taxed. And it would gradually increase the taxes on all those products into July 2027. But there's actually kind of an interesting hitch in it. There's a provision in the bill that would reduce taxes on something called modified risk tobacco products. I don't have enough time to get into that. I'll have the story in the chat. Some things you should know about this is proponents say it will cut down on smoking. The money's supposed to go to preschool. Governor Jared Polis is a big fan of that. Opponents point out the fact that this was negotiated behind the scenes and dropped in the final hours of legislative session. And one of the people that was a neutral on this bill and actually involved in this negotiations was Altria, one of the world's largest tobacco conglomerates. And a lot of the reporting that I've done has shown that some of the provisions of the bill actually stand to benefit Altria. And Altria was neutral this year, despite the fact that in previous years, they spent a lot of money in Colorado to block similar tobacco and cigarette tax increases. So I was on Colorado Matters actually today talking about this. We'll drop the link in the chat because it's pretty complicated. This is another one of those things, kind of like Amendment 76, where there's some stuff under the surface that you should probably know about before you cast your ballot.
Well done. Proposition 113, Jesse, go.
Oh, God. Okay. Proposition 113 is whether it will decide whether or not Colorado should join the National Interstate National Popular Vote Compact, I believe is the name of it. State lawmakers in 2019, Democrats solely passed this bill, and it would sign Colorado into this National Interstate Compact that seeks to kind of bypass the Electoral College and allow for a national popular vote instead of the Electoral College. Don't have time to get into what the Electoral College is right now. Our voter guide has all those details on it. Proponents of it say this is the ultimate one person, one vote kind of situation. It guarantees that your vote counts as much as a vote as somebody in any other state, and kind of equalizes everything out and makes things more fair. Opponents say that it gives smaller states and states with less population less voice, and gives more voice to more populous states. So for instance, California and New York, a lot of the opponents of it talk about the idea that, Colorado would essentially be handing our vote over to those states if we sign on to the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. It's just pretty interesting. It falls really along party lines. Democrats are for this for the most part. Republicans are against it. And this is the first time in how long that voters have gotten the option to.
This is the first time ever that voters will vote on whether to join the National Popular Vote, because the power is mostly vested to legislatures to do this. And if you're interested in the history on this, there's really fascinating backstory back to the time where this wasn't a partisan issue. Check out the Daily's podcast from today. They dive deep into the history going back into the 70s on this. Okay, Jesse, your third and a triple hitter. Proposition 114, go.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so Proposition 114, this is another kind of quirky one. It is the decision about whether or not to reintroduce gray wolves in Colorado. Colorado used to have gray wolves. They don't anymore because they're extinct. We killed them all. And basically the question would direct the Colorado Parks and Wildlife to start introducing them on the western slope in 2023. This has been a really controversial one because ranchers hate this, and hunters do too, because they're worried about it, cutting into their bottom line. Wolves and cattle do not get along very well, it turns out, and folks are pretty worried about that in the financial bottom line. There's also something to be said for the fact that this would be the first time in the country where voters would be directing the reintroduction of a species instead of having it done by scientists. So it's a pretty interesting thing, and it's getting voters involved in ththese kind of biological questions. A ton of money is poured into this from out of state, from some kind of interesting characters. We've done some interesting reporting on that, and you should know that wolves might actually already be in Colorado because they've already been reintroduced in some other states, including Wyoming, and there's been a lot of evidence. I think it's even been proven, if I'm correct, that wolves migrated into Colorado. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how people feel about that one.
Wonderful. Take a sip. I'll take the next one. Proposition 115. This would prohibit abortions after 22 weeks of pregnancy unless the life of the woman is threatened. Now, this is a complicated issue and a personal one, so I'm just going to stick to the basics on this. The 22-week ban applies in most situations unless a physician determines a woman's life is threatened. Now, opponents say that's not enough protection because if the woman's life is threatened, by then it could be too late, and they think doctors need to be able to take other action. One other important thing, this does not include exceptions for situations involving rape or incest. And opponents say it wouldn't apply to a lethal fetal diagnosis either. So if the measure is approved, it includes penalties for doctors who violate the law, including a misdemeanor criminal charge and the loss of the medical license for at least 3 years, but there is no penalty for the women. I'm up next with Proposition 116. Now this measure asks voters for approval to permanently reduce the state's income tax from 4.63% to 4.55%. So what does that mean? It means the average taxpayer in Colorado would save $37 starting in tax year 2020. Whether you support this is very much up to whether you feel like $37 will make a difference to you. The opponents of this say that $37 to each Coloradan adds up to $1.5 million that could go to schools, healthcare, prisons, law enforcement, all sorts of things that the state currently funds. It comes at a tough time. The state faced a $3 billion budget deficit just this year, and $1.5 million perpetually year after year could go really far. We'll have interesting details on that one in the unaffiliated newsletter on where Governor Jared Polis stands. So stay tuned for that one on Friday. But let me jump, I set the clock up again. Let me jump to Proposition 117. Okay, this is even more esoteric, or at least on par with Amendment B. This one puts limits on fees created by the Colorado legislature for state enterprises. So let me unpack that. What's an enterprise? So an enterprise is effectively a government-run business. Think of it like the lottery or our state park system, where they charge fees and they're allowed to keep them to help cover the cost of providing the service of the parks. And since the passage of Tabor in 1992, government fees have increased pretty significantly because Tabor limited the ability of lawmakers to seek tax increases. Now, it's important to know that Tabor includes provisions allowing for fees. They're not going around Tabor on this. Tabor allows for fees, but the sponsors of this measure feel like lawmakers have, I'm running out of time already, have abused their power and gone too far on these fees. So it's kind of a broader question about the size of government and how much authority state lawmakers should have to set the finances of the state versus the voters. Proposition 118. This measure would create a $1.3 billion state paid family leave program starting in 2024. It allows employees up to 12 weeks of leave and guarantee retention of their job when they come back. How is this funded? Well, it's funded half by employees and half by employers. They each pay 0.45% of a weekly paycheck into a statewide pool starting in 2023. And the benefits would become available the following year. So what's at stake with both employers and employees paying in? It's a kitchen table financial issue. But the supporters say that this kind of benefit is necessary. It's one provided in countries across the world, and it's something we should have to support families. One quick caveat, another number to throw out there, the most an employee could claim is $1,100 a week in wages. So it kind of depends on how that factors into you, but it would provide up to 12 weeks of paid family leave. A similar effort, stupid ass alarm. A similar effort failed in the legislature earlier this year. Interesting to know the governor is neutral on that one.
Also interesting to note that the Colorado Senate Democrats who wouldn't move this bill forward have all endorsed it except for one. I think every state has Democrat except for one endorsed this, but they couldn't pass it in the legislature even though they have the majority. Isn't that kind of weird?
It's not kind of weird if you cover the Capitol like you and I do and you know about the special interest up there. But again, we'll get into that in another happy hour sometime with maybe some extra beer on that one. Okay, the Colorado judges. There are 4 Colorado judges on the ballot, on statewide ballot. And there's a bunch of local ones. I'm not too familiar with everyone's local judges all across the state, but let's dive into these first 4. Just a quick word on these because, to be honest, I don't know as much as I want to know as a voter on these, and they're tough because the information is super limited. The judicial performance standards are opaque, and there's not a lot of details. A couple of years, they even changed the rules, in fact, to make these a little less specific. So to be honest, I'm going to flip through the blue book with you and just offer a couple of thoughts on each really quickly. On the Supreme Court, you have Melissa Hart. She is a appointee of Governor John Hickenlooper back in 2017, a former law professor at CU Boulder's law school. Now, she's actually become a bit of a political piñata because Cory Gardner has attacked John Hickenlooper over this appointment, in part because Melissa Hart donated to a number of Democrats during her tenure, or before she was a judge, and including John Hickenlooper, and including Attorney General Phil Weiser. So a bit of a political piñata there. It's important to note that
also donated to her campaign when she ran for CU Regent.
That's true. That's true. And so the number I look at on this in the blue book is the attorneys that respond to the question on this, on whether she met standards. 90% say yes. That's a little different when you flip the page over to Justice Carlos Zamora Jr. He only met the standards of 69% of attorneys, 13% answered no, and 19% had no opinion. A couple interesting notes here. John Hickenlooper made this appointment in July 2018. So if you're doing the math, yeah, that's about 6 months before he left office. An issue we're all talking about right now in Washington, of course. This is, like Melissa Hart, his first retention evaluation. It describes a little bit here. I would note that 69% is fairly low when you look at the other judges, at least in my blue book here in Denver. So that's maybe something to consider. I wish I knew more on some of his decisions. It's unfortunately a huge hole in the news coverage here in Colorado.
One thing about Justice Zamora, if anyone remembers the Aurora Theater shooting trial, he was the presiding judge in that. So you may have seen his face before as somebody who's had some time in the public eye.
His favorite movie is My Cousin Vinny. He wrote that in his judicial application. I remember reading that a few years ago. So just a fun fact.
Oh, don't make me start quoting that movie. It's too funny. Okay, on the Court of Appeals, you have Judge Ted Tao. Now, the one thing that jumped out at me from the book is that he needs to remain mindful of the mechanical aspects of writing and to engage in a robust editing process. As a writer, we can relate on that one. I will note that the attorneys who responded on whether he met judicial performance standards was 66%. Again, one of the lower ones. They tend to all meet the standards. So again, we're splitting hairs here. And the final one, Court of Appeals Judge Craig Welling. There's actually, this is probably the most interesting one. 84% of attorneys wrote that he met judicial performance standards, but he's actually the subject of an opposition campaign. One of the few out there, mostly based out in Grand Junction, for his appellate court decision regarding a speedy trial appeal for a sex offender. The judge ruled that that speedy trial guarantee we all have in the Constitution was violated. So the sex offender was allowed to be released on this technicality, as opponents call it. They are campaigning against him, saying it was an inappropriate ruling, but of course he was backed up by two other judges on the Court of Appeals in that decision. I will note that only about a dozen judges have been removed from office through a popular vote like this, and only 4 were removed when they met performance standards. And all 4 of these judges we just went through met performance standards. If you have questions on these, we can try to do some quick research for you or dive in or follow up later. But we have just run through the entire statewide ballot in, well, a little more than 15 minutes. But it's now time for your questions.
So
Eric?
we do have one that is relevant to what we were just doing with kind of looking at the blue book. Jack has asked, what should we do if we never received a blue book or you only received one in Spanish, which is what happened at my apartment.
Oh, that's not good. Well, only some counties receive them in Spanish if you meet a certain threshold of the population. If you did not get one, they're online. Eric, I think I've got a link here. I can drop it in the chat here. They are, because I've searched it so many times, it's like automatic on my computer. I'm gonna drop it into the chat. You can read all this there, and there's so much more, of course. Blue book in English and Spanish. Let me send to all panelists.
And attendees, yes, and then we'll be able to see it in there. There we go.
Eric, one quick interlude. Did our special guest join us?
It does not look like he's arrived.
Okay. I'm gonna keep it in suspense just in case he can make it happen. Jesse, why don't you take the next question while I reach out?
Let's see. We had a couple of questions up at the top. Hold on. Let me get up here. Get back through my own chats. So there were a handful of questions from Paula that all kind of had to do with the same thing, about the changing demographics of Colorado, both a lack of younger voters for Republicans and more women turning out, and this year turning out in seemingly for Democrats. So if there's any kind of thoughts you guys have about sort of the changing demo.
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned before when I was talking about the Senate race, Colorado has shifted significantly towards unaffiliated voters. They're now the largest voting bloc. Michael Bennet, our Democratic senator, always used to talk about how Colorado's a third. Well, that's not actually true anymore. Unaffiliateds make up by far the largest percentage, and then after that is Democrats, and just under that is Republicans. So the thing that we're really watching for this election cycle is that women vote. It's a huge, really potent force here. And Democrats feel like they're going to, be swept into office across the board with that female vote. That, those suburban women are specifically going to abandon President Donald Trump and the Republican Party and side with Democrats. That remains to be seen, but polling certainly indicates as much. And that's one of the reasons why when you talk to Republicans privately, they're pretty nervous about this election. I've heard a lot of doom and gloom from the party. The younger vote's another one. I think John's a little better at voter demographics than I am, but I feel like younger voters tend to lean more blue, and Colorado is a younger state. We're gaining a lot of residents. Things have changed a lot since even 2014. John, how many more voters we have? It's like 300,000 more, I think.
400, so it depends on how you count.
Right. So, things have changed a lot just in the last 6 years since our last Senate election. Things have shifted to the left. And even sometimes folks will say that's not true, but you just got to look at the election results, the voter registration numbers, and it becomes pretty clear that, the state is moving to the left and maybe is a little more blue-purple than red-purple these days.
One interesting thing, when you dive into the early vote numbers, and these just changed a little bit today, but women vote, the women vote in both parties right now is actually below their 2016 levels. It's by a fraction, so don't get too worked up just yet. But in 2016, of the Democrats who voted, 60% were women. This year so far, we're at 58.9. So again, just a fraction. Of the Republicans who vote, 49.6% were women in 2016, and this year they're at 48%. Now, still plenty of time to vote. Again, we're still splitting hairs, but when you're talking about percent, you're talking about, well, hundreds of thousands of voters by the time we're done with all this. Women are also turning out at a lower rate for unaffiliated compared to 2016. So how this vote turns out in the final days, whether they can exceed their proportions in 2016 would be a good indicator of a strong Democratic year, or if they can at least match them in a year where a woman was at the top of the ticket, that would spell good news for Democrats in particular.
Just a reminder to everybody who's watching, if you haven't opened the chat window yet, if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see that as an option, or you can drop your questions over in the Q&A section.
Eric, before the next question, I want to ask Jesse if he likes the beer I bought him.
Yeah,
what do you think?
A light beer. I love light beer.
You just like drinking out of a 25-ounce can, I have a feeling.
Well, I know, but so I was trying to take a picture of it. It literally is as big as my head, this can. So people may
be careful, buddy. That's too. It's a cream ale, in case anyone's interested. A cream ale is a very light ale. It's made similar to a lager. It's made with corn. So Jesse should taste a little bit of his old Genesee cream ale days, maybe a touch of the PBR lagers that he drinks. But super light. It's essentially a lawnmower beer, as they call it. A great beer to drink while filling out your ballot.
Great. Steve Parker had asked over in our chat, not a question about the ballot, but just a reminder to everybody. The newsletter that John writes with the help of the politics team and every other person on staff most weeks is called The Unaffiliated. And if you go to coloradosun.com/unaffiliated, you can see how to get it. And right now, because we're here in the middle of election season, if you use the code election, all one word, when you're getting your membership, you can get a discount on a premium membership that comes with The Unaffiliated. It comes with Jason Blevins, who you may know as our outdoors reporter, does a weekly newsletter called The Outsider. And you get all that with a premium Sun membership, and you help support the journalism that we do here at the Sun. So the link's there in the chat. Just wanted to remind everybody. And John, you've got some conversations about cream ale in the chat.
Yeah, Madagascar from Platt Park. I used to live a block from that place. That was a dangerous rental place. Platt Park makes a good cream ale. Also, their Tropical Snow Dance IPA has really come up from where it was. Super flavorful, super fruity. Not your typical IPA. So head down there and try it for sure.
Amanda has asked us to get a little bit more into the behind-the-scenes stuff for Prop EE. So Jesse's definitely our expert there. So he can give us a little bit more insight into the way that this all came about and the kind of unlikely people that are resisting it and pushing for it.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Bonnie's going to join me for this one. So, yeah, Propositions EE is super interesting. Some of the backstory is that the legislature paused and then came back and then paused again. No, it paused and then it came back because of the coronavirus crisis. And so things were wrapping up and we were going to end on a Friday. And then all of a sudden on Thursday, this 40-page bill drops out of nowhere about tobacco taxes, and it entered its first committee hearing, and some of the lawmakers that were on the committee hadn't even seen the bill yet. I think it went on the website like at the moment that the committee hearing had started. So this is a massive piece of policy, and all of a sudden it comes up out of nowhere. So we're trying to dig into it in the last days of legislative session, which is like the most chaotic time ever. You're not sleeping. There's a whole bunch of policy that's trying to be passed in the final couple hours. And anyways, this bill comes out of nowhere. They had to actually extend the session to get it passed because of rules. And the bill passed, it increases all these taxes in a significant way. So the session ends, coronavirus is still raging, we start looking into the bill a little bit more, and we see some interesting things in it. Specifically, there's a part of the bill that no one was talking about called a minimum price floor provision, which requires that starting next year that a pack of cigarettes be sold for no less than $7 a pack, and that in 2024 it goes up to $7.50 a pack. Now, other states have these minimum price floor provisions, but other ones raise the prices in a way that keeps the market competitive. And so there's discount cigarette brands, and then there's premium cigarettes. Premium cigarettes are known as are typically associated with the brand Marlboro, which is owned and created and manufactured by that company Altria that helped negotiate the passage of the bill. Discount cigarette brands say that putting this minimum price floor provision in place handed Altria the market share, which was unfair. They're actually suing in court to invalidate that minimum price floor provision should Proposition EE pass. So that's part A. Part B is I was looking into the bill a little bit more, and I found another thing in the bill that benefited Altria, which was called a modified risk tobacco products tax reduction. Super mouthy, long, crazy, wonky piece of policy. So all the cigarette taxes and nicotine taxes, tobacco taxes are going up, except for these modified risk tobacco products, which is an FDA designation, and it's only awarded to 12 products. Now, a third of the products are created or manufactured by Altria, which again helped negotiate this bill. And people who are part of the negotiation said Altria was really fighting super hard to keep this modified risk tobacco products tax discount in the bill. It was something that it was super important to them. So that again was something that benefits Altria and not other companies. There's a few other products, but they're all kind of related to the same thing. Modified risk tobacco products are super complicated, so we could be here all night talking about those. The bottom line is, health advocates have reasons for both these things to be in there. The minimum price floor provision is aimed at increasing tobacco prices, which studies have shown drives down use. And the modified risk tobacco product tax discount is aimed at moving people away from more lethal, or unhealthy,
Right.
products toward these ones that are supposed to be a little bit safer. But again, the ones that are a little bit safer are still not safe, right? I mean, it's still addicting you to nicotine, and there's still problems with it. It's a very complicated issue. We got 2 or 3 stories on that. I don't know if you dropped them in the chat, Eric.
A little bit higher. Yeah.
Right. So, and I'm happy to answer questions too. My email is just Jesse@Colorado Sun. It's complicated. I've actually gotten more reader feedback and text and stuff about this than anything else I've written because people are super interested in it. So, and it's complicated and hard to explain.
We have one follow-up question with that kind of goes into another one. So, John, go ahead. I just interrupted you, and
I'm going to just add a line of political background on Prop E that I think that is fascinating when you talk about the Democratic lawmakers compromising with a major tobacco company to get this thing on the ballot.
And health advocacy groups.
Yeah, that shot it down 2 years ago. Prop EE is a major goal of Governor Jared Polis. He actually promised expansion of preschool in his first 2 years. That won't happen. But this would get it closer to there. This would allow him to get close to meeting his campaign promise by expanding preschool. This wouldn't take effect, correct me if I'm wrong, Jesse, I think it's 2023 when the preschool would expand, or maybe 2024 fiscal year.
So originally, all the money was initially just good to go to preschool because of the problems with the state budget given the coronavirus crisis. They actually threw in this kind of clause that allows the tax revenue to at first go back to the general fund, which is like the lawmakers' fund of money that they get to play with, and then it eventually goes to preschool.
The general fund is the discretionary fund, about $11 billion that funds all the things we know government funds at the state level: healthcare, prisons, law enforcement, education, human services, things like that.
So I see this follow-up question about, I think what this person
ALEC, yeah.
is the ALEC bill. And so for those of you who don't know what ALEC is, it's a conservative policy organization, national conservative policy organization. Prop E, no, it's actually, this is run by Democrats, and Republicans were against this bill in the legislature. For the most part, I think there were one or two who voted for it because they say that raising taxes on anything during a pandemic or an economic downturn is a bad idea. Now, John's the ALEC expert, so I don't know if there were any ALEC bills in Colorado this year, but maybe you do.
There were probably about a dozen, but they were all sponsored by Republicans and didn't see the light of day. Now, ALEC's not the only one to know about. On the conservative side, this abortion ban is language that you see at the national level pushed by some anti-abortion groups. And on the Democratic side, the National Popular Vote and Paid Family Leave are initiatives backed by national organizations that use similar language, kind of model legislation to help create these two, and are now pumping huge money into those races. So it worked. This happens on both sides, but because we have Democrats in charge of both chambers at the State House, you actually see more Democrat bills from the State Innovation Exchange, from other liberal and progressive groups get through more than ALEC bills.
Cool. We've got one from Christine that is a little bit broader and just in general. So obviously in 2016, we had pretty big surprises on the sort of like the way polling was saying that the races were going to go, especially at the presidential level. So she's just kind of asking for a temperature check, like how much do we trust the polling coming out? Because it's been really consistent, here in Colorado, but also nationwide. Just like, are there any factors that would make you hesitant about trusting these polls that we're seeing?
I'm just clicking over to our poll tracker at coloradosun.com. We head-to-head poll and the approval ratings for both Biden and Trump here in Colorado. When it comes to these polls, I trust them because they were actually right in 2016 here in Colorado, predicting a Hillary Clinton victory, actually 4.9%. Some showed it a touch closer. At any rate, about 5%, about 3% or 4%, in that range, it tends to be in the margin of error. And you've got to be aware of that when you're looking at polls. I've been on about 40,000 Zoom calls in the last 2 weeks talking about polling at the national level. I can summarize it this way. The national polls were right in 2016, pretty darn close. And they expect the national polls to be right in 2020. Do the national polls matter? When it comes to picking the president, not at this point. We use the electoral college system where each state matters. Now, 538.com did a fascinating analysis looking at these state polls and found just a slight difference between the state average advantage for Biden and the national average for Biden. So we are seeing some consistency. We're seeing across state polls and national polls. And I think you can trust the national polls once again when it comes to the state polls. That's where it's a little trickier. But I talked to a pollster here in Colorado the other day who just found Biden up 17, his largest, I think it's largest. Let me look at our table here. Yeah, the largest advantage here in Colorado, at least since the general election started. And he's actually worried about undersampling Democrats, particularly on down ballot races. We'll have a story coming out soon at coloradosun.com just about this blue wave 2020 election and what it could mean. So stay tuned for that one.
Great. Looks like we got about 15 minutes left. We've got a question here from Jeff that I think is going to be a good sort of educational way to do things. He's talking specifically about the Blue Book argument against Amendment B, where it mentions prevents special interests from obtaining tax breaks. What Jeff's asking is what's defined as a special interest, like especially from state legislative or legislate. You know what I'm saying? Legislation is the word I was trying to say. Yeah. Perspective.
This is a tricky one, and we look to have our ringer Brian Easton join us for this call, but he is also drinking beer, but it doesn't happen to be in a place where he can join this Zoom call tonight. What we know about Amendment B is that the biggest question mark about it is what happens in the future. So we repeal Gallagher. There's a temporary freeze for a few years, so nothing can happen to property tax rates. They stay the same. That also means they can't go down. And we do have a decrease scheduled in 2021. So that's why the opponents are saying it will increase taxes, just to explain that part. When it comes to special interest, the concern is this. Businesses pay a larger share of the property tax burden than residential homeowners. They pay that 55% rate ratio. For homeowners, we pay 45% rate. There's concern that special interests, meaning business groups, will work their magic at the State House and negotiate a lower rate. Even if it's 54% to 46%, that would be a business tax cut, but a residential property tax increase. So that's what they're talking about. Business interests at the Capitol can be very powerful. They don't always win, but there are as many businesses in every lawmaker's district that matter just as much as the homeowners. And oftentimes these regular voters are the business owners. So there's a lot of overlap. And we've had these inequities for such a long time that there is likely to be a push from the business community to adjust this sooner rather than later, and maybe sooner than having a long-term solution. What does that long-term solution look like? That's a darn good question. The legislature has been looking at this for a decade and hasn't been able to figure out. And they kind of punted by just putting this on the ballot with a temporary freeze instead of a replacement option. So it's a repeal without a replacement option, with big questions about whether voters will get to decide on that future property tax rate or not. But then again, folks say this is what we elected lawmakers to do, to figure this out. And, you know, we as Colorado voters shouldn't be deciding the nitty gritty about property taxes. The most likely solution you're about to see, and I'll stop this geeky rant, is a possible regional approach that sets the bar, the ratio for property taxes on a regional level so that we don't have the inequities out on the Eastern Plains, which are basing their property tax rates on Denver home prices, which everyone agrees is just not workable.
So that looks like we've run through all of the existing questions. So again, everyone who's still... Yeah, anybody got questions or comments about beer, please drop what you're drinking in the chat. I'm sure John will have much to say about any of these that you drop in there.
I'm a big kombucha and wine fan too, so there's that. Jesse, I want to ask you, you've been looking into a lot on the Senate race and Cory Gardner and the coronavirus legislation. This is going on as in the headlines this week. I'm curious what you make of the Senate race. Over at Colorado Politics, Joey Bunch wrote that time has run out. The clock has run out on Donald Trump and Cory Gardner here. I'm not looking for your opinion on this, but talk to us about kind of what we've reported and what the experts are telling you so far about what the final 2 weeks looks like.
Yeah, I actually wrote something about this analysis piece in the Washington Post. Was it this week? It was this week.
It was this week.
Yeah, it was this week, about this race. And, you know, it's been really, you know, I've covered both these guys for a few years now. And it's been pretty interesting to watch it. You know, Cory Gardner didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016. He, after the release of the Access Hollywood video where the president, then presidential candidate, bragged about sexually assaulting women and talking about them in degrading terms. He said he could never vote for Donald Trump. And then President Trump won. Cory Gardner recently admitted that he didn't think that was going to happen. And Republican voters in Colorado really got on board with the president, kind of across the board. And Cory Gardner followed. He's kind of saw the writing on the wall and you know, knew that he needed every Republican vote possible to win this year. And it was a decision that'll confused a lot of people. But when you started to talk to Republicans, you understood why he made the decision that he did. You know, it's not really working out for him. I mean, we thought that the polls would shift. If you talk to Republicans, they say that they thought things were going pretty well heading into the last few weeks of the election. But then after the Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death the last few weeks, the race kind of was sealed or appeared to be sealed on behalf of John Hickenlooper. And so you're starting to see Democratic groups pull out of the state, drop their spending for John Hickenlooper because they feel like they're confident that he's going to win. You know, the next 2 weeks will be interesting to see. You know, if Cory Gardner can turn things around. I mean, as John mentioned, polling has been really consistent in this race that, Hickenlooper's ahead. So if the polling's accurate, then Cory Gardner's headed for a pretty significant loss.
And what was the best quote of the season you mentioned in your Washington Post piece? Not even Jesus Christ can outperform Donald Trump if he's down double digits.
Right, and that gets into a little bit of nuance of the race, but essentially, Cory Gardner's entire strategy was to, convince all the Republicans that he was, on board with President Donald Trump, so he could secure their vote and not lose any votes among them. Republicans are really loyal to the president in Colorado, and there was fears that if Cory wasn't so loyal to Trump that he wouldn't be able to, he would lose some of those Republican votes. But at the same time, convince enough unaffiliated voters who really don't like Trump in Colorado that Cory Gardner's had a good record. I think my dog just took my shoe. That Cory Gardner has a solid record, has been able to get things done for Colorado. But so far, we're not seeing, unaffiliated voters, according to polls, break towards Gardner in a significant enough way to overcome, that Trump-Gardner connection.
Yeah, the Senate race and the coronavirus debate right now, leading into the Supreme Court debate in Washington, is pretty fascinating. Cory Gardner voted for the scaled-back Republican
skinny. Yeah.
This week, he said something's better than nothing. Now, in debates, Governor John Hickenlooper said he would be open to a compromise, and if he was in Washington, these discussions would be going different. So I reached out to John Hickenlooper to ask how he would vote on this bill, but they have not responded.
Let me get to a question that Jill asked here. I don't know that anybody, or that it was available to everybody. She was asking about the Denver ballot questions. So this is an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about the Sun. So we are very focused on doing corner-to-corner statewide coverage. So we haven't written much about the Denver ballot initiatives because we're still just, about a dozen people putting out the Sun here like that. So there are some great guides out there through like the Denver Post and Denverite and other places like that that have pretty good looks at all of those. I'm going to segue that into a pitch here that if anybody on this call is not yet a member of the Sun, now's a really good time to go do it to help not only support the work that we have been doing, but help us kind of get ready for, after the election. We're looking to expand, we're looking to hire more people so we can do things like covering the Denver ballot races and, a lot of the suburban races that we know are really important, are going to affect millions of people. But right now we just didn't have the resources to cover everything like that. So we decided to focus on the content that's the most useful for everybody. So
one exception, sorry to cut you off there.
Oh, please go ahead.
The climate tax measure. Evan Oxner with the Sun, an intern on our politics team this year, wrote a really fascinating piece on the climate tax measure. And we covered it because it's of national interest. This is one of the more unique ways cities have gone about trying to address climate change with a sales tax increase. Other places have done a tax on certain elements of business, tax on greenhouse gases, other kind of more specific ways aimed at climate change. And we talked to a city councilman behind the measure who said 2 other cities have already reached out to him about possibly replicating this in their cities. So Denver's ballot measure on climate tax is one to watch. We talk a little bit about the stakes and a little bit about how other cities have gone about it. So that could provide some good context on that question. When it comes to the ones on the mayor's power, those are tough ones. Even, as I was reading it, it's hard to tell. I will say, and this is just pure reading my mail, I got a flyer somewhere in here. I have about 8,000 flyers for the Denver Democratic Party saying that they support those. I'll have to fact check myself on that one, but I'm pretty sure that's what I saw come by. So that's pretty interesting given that the mayor's a Democrat. I think these questions just depend a lot on what you think of the direction of the council these days, and it's going in a different direction. So I definitely would read some of those great pieces at Denverite. That's what I'm doing as a voter.
Yeah, but I mean, to answer, I think you kind of answered the question though here. I mean, we follow politics in all realms because we're nerds, but so we can answer that question that yes, there is a lot of friction between the Denver City Council and Denver Mayor Michael Hancock, and these ballot initiatives are aimed at kind of providing a check on his power. And again, we highly recommend the work of our colleagues over at Denver Right CPR. Have done some really good stuff on this.
Yeah, and I was right. The Denver Democratic Party did endorse both of them, which is kind of fascinating.
You want to share your mailers? What's the last mailer you got?
The last mailer I got, this really awkward picture of Cory Gardner.
Oh wait, I got a Cory Gardner.
A 4-pager.
This mailer is Cory Gardner's face is supposed to, I think, look like Trump's face. And I think we all agree everyone looks bad when their mouth is open. So I hope no one took screenshots.
Mine's pro Cory.
Pro Cory, yeah.
There we go.
There's a dog treat on it.
I got that too. I can go flyer for flyer, Jesse.
So it looks like we're getting close to the end of time. And Laura made a comment that I think is something that I know Jesse brings up a lot on these. And we've done reporting about basically the idea that unaffiliated does not mean undecided. That, we talk a lot about the huge chunk of unaffiliated voters that we have in Colorado, but there's this, sometimes this perception that every one of them must be really on the fence and deciding. But I'll let you guys talk a little bit about more of what we've learned as we look into that.
I did a big story on this back in January or late December, Eric. If you can find it, drop it in the chat. Unaffiliated voters is the biggest misnomer in Colorado politics because it suggests that they are truly independent, and they are not. We know from limited surveys and data from primaries that it's about a 60-40 split that they lean toward Democrats. And that's important to know, because if you're seeing unaffiliated turnout high and Democratic turnout high, that's a mostly good sign for Democrats. I'm pulling up something now, and I don't know if I'll be able to find it quickly enough, but the CU Boulder folks at the Political Science Department did a really fascinating analysis, a poll. I've got plenty of issues with the methodology that I won't go into, given that it was a non-probability, meaning it wasn't a random sample, as in you opted in to take the poll. But what they did is they forced independents, they forced unaffiliated voters to pick a side. And they actually modeled what percentage of them are actually independent. And I want to say, and I'm looking, it's in the crosstabs, lost in my email somewhere. I want to say it was low, like 11% they actually think are independent. And that fits with the reporting that we did back in December, based on just anecdotal evidence from political campaigns, showing that the middle in Colorado, that swing vote is small. And that really helps explain why we have this blue tilt. Plenty like to think of us as a purple state because our largest block of voters are unaffiliated, but most of those people forget that second part, which is most of those unaffiliated voters are Democrats. So that's what gives Colorado a lean blue status, and that's what really defines what you're seeing in this 2020 election, why John Hickenlooper is likely to win the Senate race, why Joe Biden's likely to run away with the presidential race, and why Democrats are prepared to win really far down the ballot this year and hold on to their power at the State House. We'll be covering all of that at coloradosun.com in the next few weeks. If you think we just pass out and sleep the day after the election, don't even think about it. That's when the fun really starts, when we dive into the data, when voters have spoken and we get to interpret what they've said, talk to them, and tell you about it. So I hope you'll stay tuned. I appreciate you joining us for this Ballot and Brews. Jesse, does Bonnie want to say goodbye? Do you know any tricks?
I've got treats. Here. Let's see if you can catch this one. Ready?
Nope.
I was gonna say, just like our political reporting, we catch it every time. I got nothing. I hope you all have a great night. Enjoy your beer. Enjoy the presidential debate. I'm sure the SNL skits will be even more fun on Saturday. So thank you for joining us for Ballots and Brews Happy Hour 2020, and thank you for being a member of the Colorado Sun. We really appreciate it. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.